But now we're on Daf Nun Zayin Amud Beis. Umei Peres and Machmitzim. How could Rabbi Yosef Aglili argue that there's a lav of being mechames and minchas nesachim? Minchas nesachim is made with oil, and it could never actually achieve, al pidin at least, chivutz, because Umei Peres and Machmitzim. He tells you here that the measure of oil for most menachos is only one lug for each isarin of flour. And therefore, for all the other menachos, you add mayim, you add water. So you have mei peres plus mayim, and you only have a limited amount of mei peres, one log of shemen, and therefore it's machametz. Just 1 second. Oh, in the case of minchas nesachim, 3 lugim of oil are brought with 1 isarin of flour. If it's a lamb, then it's 3 lugim. If it's a bull, a par, then it's 6 lugim. In any event, the bottom line is that in minchas nesachim, whether it be with a keves, whether it be with a par, whatever the case is, it's going to be a very significant ratio of shemen, and you're not going to add any water, and therefore it's made peros and machmitzin. So how could Rabbi Yosef Agli say yechayv from mechametz? There's no mechametz. Omer Reish Lakish, Omer Haya Rabbi Yosef Aglili, minchas sachim megabla b'mayim. That according to Rabbi Yosef Aglili, in order to create the proper mincha, and it should be mahudar, then we add water to the shemen. Up until Reish Lakish, we thought that shemen without any water, and then we have the problem of peres machmitzim. But now Reish Lakish introduces an additional volume of water that's added to the mixture to make the dough a mahudar dikkat dough, and therefore now it's subject or susceptible to chimos because you have the water with the mei peros. Okay, now we get to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, if you remember, said that Yechayev Mishum, there's a ribui to be Mechayev Mishum Lechem Aponim. Oh, so now we embark on a sugya. This sugya is heavy kachim. The Gemara says, Midas Yaveshi, there's no admixture of liquids in the case of the lechem aponim, and therefore when you measure the flour that is used for the lechem aponim, you do it in a kli that is designated for measuring solids and not liquids. And v'shami le'Rav Kiva midas yavish lo niskadsha. When Moshe Rabbeinu put the oil of the Shemen HaMishcha in order to sanctify the Kalim, when it came to measuring Kalim, it's receptacles that we use to measure things, then Moshe Rabbeinu was only, according to Rabbi Kiva, Moshe Rabbeinu was only Makadesh, Kli, I know it is Nozlim, but I think in the Gemara's language it's called Lach. In any event, it's liquids. And those kalim that were designated for measuring of liquids, they were subject to Mashiach, and therefore they have a status of klisharis. Not so in the case of yavish. In the case of solids, a kli, a vessel that's designated to measure out solids, was never sanctified by Moshe Rabbeinu. And if that be the case, then we don't understand Rabbi Akiva and the lechem aponim. Because what's going to be makadesh lechem aponim? It can't be the kli, because it's a kli that's designated for the measurement of solids, and that kli was never niskadesh. If it's never niskadesh, then anything that goes into it is not sanctified because it's a kli chol. So the first moment in time that you could be Mekadesh the Shtei Lechem is only when you put it on the Shulchan. By then it's already too late for him to violate the law of Lo Teafa, of Chimus. Is Sholach Ravin, Mishmeid Rabbi Yochanan. So Ravin sent an explanation to Bavel from Eretz Yisrael, where Rabbi Yochanan was in Eretz Yisrael. Kach hi hatzah shel Mishnah, the Epuch. Now, here the word Mishnah apparently means Brisa, and it seems that Rabbi Yochanan is not going to accept the text and the presentation of the Brisa that we learned until now. According to that text, Rabbi Yochanan is the one who says that your machamis lechem aponim yechayev. It can't be. It can't be Rabbi Yochanan the Epoch. We have to switch around the names, and that which we said in the name of Rabbi Kiva really belongs to Rabbi Yossi Aglili and vice versa, and therefore it's only Rabbi Yossi Aglili who would say that you could be chayev for being machametz lechem aponim, because Rabbi Yossi Aglili is going to hold that even a kli yavesh is niskadesh. So Rabbi Yochanan holds, as we just saw, that midas yavesh lo niskadesh, and therefore in lechem aponim it's impossible to say that you're chayev mishum machametz. Why? Because the first moment of kiddush is the moment you put it on the shulchan. Any chimutz that you accomplish beforehand is before the kiddush. Before the kiddush, you can't say that he was machametz illegally a lechem upon it. And therefore, according to Rabbi Yochanan's girsa, the way his text reads, because it's Rabbi Yossi Aglili who maintains that even a kli yavesh was niskadsha, and therefore it would be makadosh lechem aponim as soon as you put it into the kli. I'm sorry, did I say a kli sharis? I meant to say a kli yavish. That's what I meant to say. Anyway, so Rabbi Yossi Aglili holds that even a kli yavish was niskadsha, and therefore the lechem aponim, way before it got into the shulchan, was placed into a measuring utensil that was designated for yavish, and nevertheless it was niskadsha, and therefore there could be a lav of chimos. Rabbi Kiva Omer, no. In the case of lechem aponim, I hold that a kli yavesh is not sanctified by Moshe Rabbeinu, therefore cannot sanctify that which is in it. Therefore, lechem aponim, it's impossible to talk about a lav of machametz. So what am I going to do with the ribuy of Asher Takrivu l'rabos minchas nesachim? That even though minchas nesachim has no kmitza, nevertheless it's subject to the lav of machametz. The Azda Rabbi Yochanan Tameh, and Rabbi Yochanan is very consistent in switching around the names of the two Tanaim of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Yochanan, because we have a statement of Rabbi Yochanan that Rabbi Yossi Aglili v'echad mi talmidei Rabbi Yishmael omu dover echad. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan already attributed to Rabbi Yossi Aglili in another statement of Rabbi Yochanan the shita, the opinion that even a midah of yavesh is niskadsha. Umanu, who is this disciple, anonymous disciple of Rabbi Shmuel? It's none other than Rabbi Yoshia. So we're going to have now machlokes between Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonasan. They are very often bari plugta. Tisanya, we learned to the Brisa, and this Brisa is going to analyze the kiddush of Moshe Rabbeinu with the shemen hamishcha as far as a mid of yavesh. Vayim shachem vayikadish osam. Rabbi Yoshia Omer midas halach nimshach bein bifnim bein bachutz, midas yavish nimshach bifnim below nimshach mi bachutz. So that Rabbi Yossi Aglili maintains, and Rabbi Yoshia is following in the footsteps of his Rebbe, Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Actually, I'm sorry, I messed up the names here, but it doesn't matter. Rabbi Yoshia is his Talmud of Rabbi Shmuel, and Rabbi Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yossi Aglili in this context. And what we're going to say is that although there's a difference between a midas lach and a midas yavesh, in that a midas lach was this kadsha both inside and outside, which means that anything that comes in contact with a measuring receptacle that's designated for liquids, whether it comes in contact with the inside of the kli or the outside of the kli, it gets sanctified. In the case of a kli yavesh, of midas yavesh, then it was only sanctified on the inside. So only when you put something inside the kli, in the receptacle itself, then it was miskadish. But fundamentally, the shita of Rav Yoshia, like the shita of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, is that a kli yavesh is niskadsha, albeit not to the extent of a kli lach. But Rabbi Yonasan Omer, midas halach nimshal b'ifnim v'lo nimshal b'yichud. So according to Rabbi Yonasan, even a kli lach only has a kiddush on the inside, and only that which goes inside the kli is sanctified. Midas Yavish Limshcha Kol Ikar. But as far as Midas Yavish is concerned, there was no Mashiach at all, and it's completely a Kli Chol, and hence, argues Rabbi Yochanan, it's impossible in the case of Lechem Aponin, which is totally Yavish, that it would be Niskadsha before it reaches the Shulchan, and you'd be subject to the violation of chimutz. Teidalecha. Now we're still in the price of Rabbi Yonasan. Rabbi Yonasan wants to prove now that a kli that's used to measure yavesh dry is not at all in the parsha of kiddush. Sharei ein mekadshos, right? And I'm going to prove to you now from a pasuk that a kli yavesh is not mekadesh. Tichsiv, and now we're in the parsha of Shtei Lechem. Mimosh v'seichel taviu lechem tenufa shnayim shnei esronim solos tiena chametz efenim bikurim lashem. So look at that word lashem and emphasize the word lashem. And we're talking about the Shtei Lechem of Chag HaShavuos, which, if you recall from our Mishnah, that they are chametz. In other words, the tanur, the oven in which you bake the Shtei Lechem, that is mekadesh the Shtei Lechem. When you measured it out, you used the kli. The answer is that kli was designated for yavetz, for dry, and it's not mekadesh. What's the source, the root of this machlokas as to whether or not the kli, the mid of yavesh, was niskadsha or not? The osam. It all revolves around the word osam. So let's just read the pasuk. Sorry. It says, "Vayhi b'yom kalos Moshe lakimis hamishcha v'yishkach oso." No, that's not it. Vayimshach oso v'kadish oso v'es kol kelov v'es hamizbeach v'es kol kelov vayimshachem v'yikadish osam. So how do we read or interpret this miut of osam? Osam is always a miut. And it's referring to Moshe Rabbeinu being Moshech the Caleb. Osam, Rav Ashi says, Lim'ute midas yavish b'chutz. Which means basically, a midas yavish could be makadesh, but not b'chutz, only b'fnim. Whereas Rabbi Yonasan says, lo makadesh kol ikar. Rabbi Yonasan midas yavish cholhu, like this measuring cup for solids, is chol, it doesn't have any kedusha at all, and therefore it's rekra lim'ute. I don't need a pasuk to tell me that there was no shemen hamishcha on the outside of the kli. There was no shemen hamishcha at all with regard to a kli yavish. Kitzur kra. So what is the pasuk talking about? Lim'ute midas lach mi b'chutz. So this is the shita of Rabbi Yonasan, that we go down one madriga. A midas yovish is not makadosh at all, and a midas lach is makadosh on the inside of the kli, but not on the outside of the kli. Lema nami. Well, I don't understand. When Rabbi Yochanan made his statement, he linked up Rabbi Yossi Aglili with Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yoshia is the Talmud of Rabbi Shmuel. Why didn't he do it the other way around? Why didn't he go one step further and be clear about it? And Lemanami Rabbi Akiva should have added that Rabbi Yochanan should have added that Rabbi Akiva and Echad Mitalmidi Rabbi Yishmael Amru Dover Echad. That Rabbi Akiva is like Rabbi Yonasan, right? You mentioned Rabbi Yochanan mentions that Rabbi Yoshia is like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Why didn't he go a step further and say that Rabbi Yonasan is like Rabbi Akiva? So my answer is Mishum Delo Shavi Midas Lach La Dodi, because he couldn't. Rabbi Yochanan could not link Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yonasan because they're saying two different things. They may agree as far as the Yavish is concerned, but they disagree as far as Lach is concerned. Rabbi Yonasan holds that Kli Lach is only Mekadesh Bifnim. Rabbi Akiva holds that in the case of Kli Lach, they were Niskadsha both Bifnim and Mibachutz. Amalei Rav Popel Abaye V'ha'ika Bisa Dilachu. So we have a Kli that's called a Bisa, and this Kli is a bowl in which oil and flour of the regular minchas are mixed blila. That's the Kli for blila. And we have in this kli oil, which is a liquid. So what are you going to do with this bowl, after you do the blila? You're going to need the dough for the lechem hapanim. So again, according to Rabbi Akiva, in the Brisa, this doesn't make any sense. Because you see over here that there is chimutz for the lechem hapanim. And why is the chimutz a violation of chimutz in the lechem hapanim? It's because there was a kiddush in a bisa. And why was there a kiddush in the bisa? Because the bisa is considered lach. And no one can deny that this kiddush through a kli lach. That was never an issue. Amalei, Abai says to Papa, Kigon shalosh al gabi katavlia, some sort of a hide, a skin that's like leather, and he needs the dough of the lechem hapanim on top of this leather that he spreads out, and that leather is not kadosh, it wasn't a skadsha. Ihochi frek the Gemara de Karmel le Rabbi Yonasan teida lechosh ari ena mekadeshes, that in shtei lechem. So again, Rabbi Yonasan is going to quote the case of shtei lechem. We're talking now about the lechem hapanim. What does Rabbi Yonasan get from the shtei lechem? Ena mekadeshes. Why? Because the shtei lechem is yavish. Is lame olay. Rabbi Yoshia should have responded to Rabbi Yonasan's challenge by saying that when the Torah talks about shtei lechem and they're not niskadsha, kegon de kaila bisaron dechol. Maybe he measured the flour out in an isaron. Isaron is a measuring cup, and it was chol. Hachi hashta bishlem bisa. I can apply Abai's premise in the case of Bisa. Lo kosrach monadil la'avid Bisa le'melash bei. Right? It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah that you have to make a Bisa in order to knead the lechem panim's dough. Ki lashla al gabi ketila. He went ahead and he kneads the dough on top of this leather spread. Is leslan ba. He's allowed to do it. Ella isaron, but in the case of an isaron, not the case of katavlia, kevan di omrachmona avid isaron v'kayelu bei. right? Create an Isara, the Torah says, measure the flour in the Isaran, Shavak Isara the Kodesh, V'kayel Bisara the Chol? Could it be that when the Torah tells you that you should make this Kli called an Isaron to measure the flour in it, so you just take a Kli Chol? So therefore, Rabbi Yoshia could not have argued that a non-sacred Isaron was used to measure the Shtei Lechem flour. What happens is that we're going to have a whole list now in a brisa of that which has shirayim, and he brings it up to the mizbeach, and he's chayav for a lav. And we start with B'sar Chatos. And B'sar Chatos is eaten by the Kohen. And so too B'sar Asham. And in general, B'sar Kochi Kochi. So what's he coming to add here with Kochi Kochi? The Kivsei Atzeres. Even though they're Shlomim, they don't fit into Chatos nor Asham, but yet they have the din of Kochi Kochi. Umikochim Kalim, fine. That for sure is shirayim, so you can't burn it on the mizbeach. Umimosar ha'omer, right? There was a korban ha'omer that was brought on the second day of Pesach. He says the mikveh consists of an omer measure of barley flour. Okay, 43.2 eggs. And it's brought in the mikdash, and a kometz is separated from it and burnt on the mizbech. The remainder, right? So the remainder of the korban omer is eaten by the kohen. And if you brought this shirayim up to the mizbeach, then you violate a law. Umimoser shtei alechem, umilechem aponim, mishari menachos, shubalotas. How do we know that in all these cases you violate a lotas? Because that which was supposed to be eaten by the kohen was now burnt on the mizbeach. Tamalomar ki chol sior, v'chol tvash lo saktiru mimenu ishei lashem. Kol shehu mimenu leishim. So we're darshaning the extra word kol, cr, to tell me that you violate this lava, lo saktiru, with regard to any carbon, kol. Any carbon, again, that has shirayim. I mean, ol is not mentioned here because ol is going to be kuli kol, is going to be burnt on the mizbeach. So the Gemara says, look at this list. Shtei alechem v'lechem aponim, yesh mehem li'ishim. Right? What does yesh mehem li'ishim mean? You always need haktorah to be matir, right? Like, for example, in a classic carbon, so you bring the emurim on the mizbeach, and then the rest of the basar could be eaten by kohen. But in the cases of shtei alechem and lechem aponim, right? We don't have anything that's burnt on the mizbeach. For Tanya, yatzu shtei alechem v'lechem aponim she'ein mehem ishim. Right? So there's no concept of shirayim if there's no ishim. Ishim means set up shirayim. And now you can violate the iser of haktoras shirayim if there is shirayim. But where is the shirayim in shtei lechem lechem aponim when there's no ishim? Because only that which is burnt on the mizbeach was separated from that which was not burnt on the mizbeach and is eaten by the kohanim. On Rav Sheshes in migufo leishim. All right, so Bli Neder, we'll pick this up tomorrow. And tomorrow, I think we get together at what time? At 9:30, is that so?